Hey, this is Darren from Property Prosperity. I thought I'd give us a bit of a snapshot on where the property market's in Adelaide at the moment. So what I'm going to do, bear with me, I'm going to look down a little bit because I'm using a spreadsheet to take you through this stuff. But and if you're in other states, then you will find this interesting. What I will be doing is I'll referring to the Adelaide property market in relation to other property markets throughout Australia. So if you do have, if you are in another state and you'd like me to give you a bit of an update on where your state's at, then feel free to put a comment in the comment box, and I'm happy to talk about your state as well and how things are going. So I'll just work my way through. The one caveat to this information I'm giving to you is it comes out at the end of June. It is the information that's collected from a couple of months before that. So it's about May then when the information's come out. So it is a couple of months old, but that's as soon as we can get it basically. So it is the latest information we have so far. The other thing is what I've done is I've excluded units out of it. So I'm purely looking at houses. So just to make it a bit easier for us to try and understand all the information. So let's get straight into it. So in Adelaide, the change in sales volume, which just gives a bit of a feel of, you know, what are people are doing? Everyone putting their properties on the market, or is there less properties on the market? So if we're looking at over a 12-month period, that takes out the seasonal fluctuations, I suppose. So in Adelaide, it's increased by about 2%. If we look at other states around Australia, if we look at Perth, it's gone down by 15%. Darwin's gone down by 28.5%. You know, Sydney's gone down by 12%. So basically, you can see in the rest of Australia, Adelaide's probably one of the few places, as well as Brisbane, where the actual number of sales has increased over that period of time. So this is the actual sales volume, not the actual sales price, but the sales volume. So that means that there's more people putting their properties on the market and more people selling their properties. So so that's a bit interesting. If we're looking at the actual median sales price, averaged out over the last 12 months, Adelaide median sales price is about $430,000, which is significantly lower than all the other east states or inland states. Basically, Tasmania is a little bit less, but excluding Tasmania, we're looking at probably the next one up is probably Queensland in Brisbane. Now, if you're looking at Sydney, the median house price is around about $900,000. So you can see between $430,000 in Adelaide and $900,000 in Sydney, it's significantly cheaper in Adelaide for the median house price. So you know what they talk about as far as you know, livability or affordability, it's a lot cheaper in Adelaide relative to other states. If we're looking at the change in the median house prices, if we're looking at just over the short term, you know, over the last 3 months, Adelaide's gone up by just over 1%. Most other states, Brisbane's gone up by about 1%. Sydney's even gone up by about 1% over the last 3 months as well. So you can, you know, pretty much a lot of the states are still continuing to rise. But if you look at what's happened over the last 12 months, Adelaide's gone up about 3%. Where we look at, last 12 months, yeah, we've got Adelaide's gone up by 3%, whereas Sydney's gone up by like 14%. So if we look at that over like a 36-month time horizon, so over about 3 years, then Sydney's gone up by 46%. You know, if we're doing that over a 5-year period, Sydney's gone up by like 50%. If we look at the same period in Adelaide, you know, over the last 5 years, our house prices have gone up 7.5%. So you can see the difference between the house price increase in Sydney relative to the house price increase in Adelaide is significant. So, you know, that would probably indicate to us, which we can see by the median house price being so low, that house prices are quite affordable, and unless incomes have gone up significantly more, which they haven't really. Incomes are probably about 25% more in Sydney than they are in Adelaide. So that would mean that, you know, it's a lot more affordable for a property in Adelaide. And again, that means if you're looking for an investment or trying to get into the market, Adelaide's a lot better market to get into. So you'd probably say then that would, you know, either the Sydney market's very overpriced or the Adelaide market is underpriced, or a combination of both, basically. So you'd expect then over time the Adelaide market to go up, and you'd probably expect the Sydney market to go down. Looking at other states, they've done similar sort of things. Adelaide's probably the one that's probably stayed down as far as the most over that sort of 5-year period. You know, other states are, you know, over the last 5 years, you're looking about, what I'm looking at, rather than just looking at the total growth after the last 5 years, if we look at that as like a compound interest rate, so we look at that averaged out over the whole time. If we look at Adelaide, we've got sort of 1.5% increase in value over the last 5 years, so return on your money, I suppose. Where if you look at that relative to Sydney, it's around about 8%. So you can see, as an investment, if we're purely focused on capital gains, then Sydney's a lot better investment over those last 5 years than Adelaide would be. So 1.5% is not really that much rise. And so generally what people are talking about, they're talking about property prices rising by, doubling every 10 years. And to say when property prices double every 10 years, when you're incorporating compounding interest rates, the fact that the value increases on top of the value, that's what compounding means, is that would average out to probably just over 7%. So the fact that Sydney's over 8%, that means it's more than doubling in value over the last 10 years. The fact that Adelaide's down at whatever it was, 1.5%, means that the property prices haven't done very much at all. So that would indicate, if you're going by the average of the whole doubling in value every 10 years and assuming that property prices go up evenly between different states, because otherwise one market would be very overinflated relative to other markets. So you'd probably expect then, if it is inflated in Sydney, then it'd probably pull back, and especially with the fact that it's been over 5 years, Adelaide's held its prices down for so long, then you'd probably expect the property market in Adelaide to go up over time. So I thought that's pretty interesting. If we're looking at over a 20-year time horizon though, and again, this gives us a bit more of a long-term perspective. Okay, Adelaide's undervalued if we're looking at over the last 5 years. Over the last 7 years, over the last 20 years, Adelaide is around about 7.2%. So that equates to around that doubling in value every 10 years thing. So you can see if we look at over a long investment time horizon, then that's when people say, oh, this doubling in value over 10 years thing. And a lot of people say, well, that's not really true. Well, we've just shown an example where that's true for the Adelaide market over the last 20 years. If we're looking at Sydney, doubling in value over the last 20 years, it's around 8.4%. So it's a little bit more than the doubling in value over 10 years. Brisbane's about 6.9, Canberra's about 7.4, Perth's around 7.8. So you can see they're all around about, give or take, around that 7% mark, which is, that's over the 20-year time period. So again, that fits in with that doubling in value over 10 years. The thing to remember, this is only a general over the whole market in Adelaide, or the whole market in Brisbane, or the whole market in Sydney. So there's going to be pockets within Sydney or Adelaide or Brisbane or wherever that it's done nothing over the last 10 years. So that's the thing. It's just averaged out over time and over the entire property market. So it doesn't necessarily apply to your market. So something you might find interesting too is the average time that properties sit on the market. So in Adelaide, the average time on market is around about 48 days. This is over the last 12 months. In Sydney, the average time on the market is only about 28 days. So you can see when properties go on the market in Sydney, they're selling pretty quickly. They're selling at a very high price, and they're selling, obviously the median house price is quite high too. So that's showing that the market's still kicking along in Sydney. But again, that's where the concerns come in from the banks and a whole pile of the government and a whole pile of different people trying to work out how they can try and take the heat out of the property market in Sydney and Melbourne and so forth. So, but in Adelaide, you can see the market's been, they talk about, properties probably every couple of months, probably you'd expect the turnover would be on average. So that's about 60 days on average. So we can see here 48 days on average for Adelaide is not too bad. Some other things we can see which are quite interesting, the vendor discounting. So that's the average reduction in price that the owner takes on the final sales price compared to what they have actually advertised it for. So in Adelaide, it's for like a 4.5% reduction in sales price compared to the original advertised price. Whereas in Sydney, it's probably only 3.8% compared to the original advertised price. But you can still see that they are reducing their prices to have to sell their properties. So it's not selling for more what the owner's expecting. So it shows that the owner's expectations are revising relative to the market. So as the market's heating up, owners expect more money, and you still have to sell things for a little bit less than maybe the owner's hoping for. So if we look at the median rental prices, so remember we talked about the median house price in Adelaide is around about $450,000, and in Sydney it's around about $900,000. So you can see that's more than double the median sales price relative to the of Sydney relative to Adelaide. But if we look at the rental price, the median rental price in Adelaide is about $350 a week. The median rental price in Sydney is about $520 a week. So you can see although the value of the property is so much higher, the rental is not that much higher in Sydney relative to Adelaide. So again, that would probably indicate that the property market is a little bit overheated in Sydney, that they're probably not getting the yields they're expecting. And if you look at the rental yield, you can see, and this just shows here in Adelaide, the rental yield is about 4.2%. Hey Chris, thanks for joining, and hey Mark, thanks for joining too. Hopefully you're finding this interesting. Again, it's quite technical, some of these things. If you are from a particular state, then feel free to put it in the comment box, and I'm happy to point out some things about your state. Also, what I could do too is I can give you some feedback on your particular suburb. If you're from Adelaide, I've got the individual suburbs listed here too, so I can more than happy to do a suburb report for you too and give you a bit of an update on what's happening in your area. So yeah, so the final thing here is look at the rental yield here. You can see Adelaide, the rental yield is around about 4.2%. Probably on average, they talk about 5% rental yields as pretty much being the norm, so 4.2% is probably a little bit lower than you'd expect. But then saying that, you're looking at Sydney, it's around about 3% rental yield. So you can see that the rental yields are a lot worse in Sydney than it is in Adelaide. So again, the reason people are getting lower returns is because of the market where it's at right now. Interest rates are really low, so the returns they're getting from other investments are quite low. Also, the reason they're willing to take lower rental returns is they're hoping for capital gains. But again, what happens is over time, if the market turns and those capital gains aren't there anymore, then you'd expect the rental yields to increase to try and offset the fact they're not getting the capital gains they'd hope for. So something else that you might find interesting, probably the final thing, is how long people hang on to their properties for. So this shows how stable the market is, I suppose. And if people are turning over their properties quite quickly, then that would give you a bit of a sign that, oh, gee, you know, the market's pretty hot here. People are thinking they're making gains and profits and they're going to buy and sell and buy and sell. So to be honest, you do want a relatively stable market. You don't want the market, you know, people buying and selling all the time like the share market, because that creates uncertainty. And again, that's one of the reasons why banks are quite happy to lend. You know, they'll lend you more money to invest in property than they would to invest in shares. You know, the reason that is because they consider it quite a stable investment. Hi, thanks for the like. They think it's a pretty stable investment, so they'll lend you 80% to invest in property, and they'll lend you up to 90% or even more, for depending on the product, if they charge you mortgage insurance, which covers some of their risk. Whereas with shares, they're quite hesitant to lend you money to get into shares. That's called leveraging, and so they're worried to lend you money in shares because then there's a potential the share market might go down. So again, that turnover is going to have an influence on that risk. And you can see with the Adelaide property market, the average hold period's around about 8 years, 8.6 years. We'd actually look at Sydney, which you'd imagine, because the market seems like it's booming, that people would buy and sell and buy and sell, and the average hold period would be a lot lower. But you actually look at it, it's around about 11 years is the average time that people hang on to their properties for in Sydney. So if we look at some other states, like Canberra, it's about 10 years, Brisbane's about 10 years, Melbourne's about 11.8, Perth is about 9.4. So you can see it's a much shorter period that people hang on to their properties in Adelaide relative to most of the other mainland states. So what that means, I don't know. It means people are probably either moving on or moving up, or there's developments happening, people buying and knocking down and subdividing, and a whole pile of different things happening. So it just gives you an indicator. And what you do is you don't really take one of these factors as an indicator of anything. I suppose collectively you put it all together, and then it just gives you a bit of a gut feel, and then you just rely on what seems to make sense with you. The cool thing is, if you're in the market, if you're in the property market, you're sort of talking to people about it all the day, and you have a pretty good idea of what other people think. And these statistics, or they just sort of back up what your gut feel is, I suppose. So hopefully that's made some sense to everybody. And I know there's some technical information in there, but so I suppose the thing to bear in mind, it looks like the property market, Sydney looks like it's cruising along pretty well. If you look at probably Perth and Darwin, it's not looking too well over there at the moment. Adelaide just kept putting along, not really much is happening at all, and it's been doing that for many years now. So the fact that it's been doing it for so long. Hey, Adelaide, thanks for joining. And the fact that they've been doing that for so long, you'd probably expect then there to be an upturn in the Adelaide property market, and maybe potentially a downturn in the Sydney or Melbourne property market. So we've had a question here from Aslican. Do you think there will be a recession soon or not too soon? So a recession depends on your definition of what a recession is. So the technical definition of a recession is it means you've had negative growth for 2 quarters. As far as the Australian economy goes, we're cruising along pretty well. Hey Elise, thanks for joining. Yeah, hey Elise, I hope you didn't just miss that question from Ashley Can. She just mentioned, do you think there's going to be a recession soon or not too soon? So yeah, it means that there's been negative growth in the last 2 quarters. The Reserve Bank, their whole thing is out there trying to keep growth happening, and they're doing that by firstly, they're quite concerned about inflation, so they want to keep inflation within a range of 2 to 3%, which inflation means that prices are going up over time, and generally that means more money in people's pockets, which means more money to spend, and so we have had pretty low inflation quite recently. A lot of that's coming, sounds a bit crazy, a lot of that's coming from discounting from businesses, particularly grocery businesses and disposable income businesses. So people are a bit hesitant to spend money at the moment. So a lot of the supermarkets are keeping their prices really low. That's where the whole Coles and Woolies competition's coming in. So that's really keeping our inflation rate quite low too, which is part of heading us towards a situation where the Reserve Bank are keeping interest rates quite low at the moment to try and give people more money in their pockets because there's less money going to interest, which again gets them to start spending more money, which is a bit of a difficulty for the Reserve Bank, because what they're trying to do is also they're trying to take the heat out of the property market in Sydney and Melbourne. So the way they've tried to deal with that is they've tried to put regulations on the finance industry and make it harder for people to borrow money, or harder for the banks to lend people more money. And essentially what that means is it's harder for people to borrow money and harder for investors to borrow money. So the unfortunate thing is that's affected not just the Sydney and Melbourne market, but that's also affecting the Adelaide property market and the Perth market, where not really much is happening. So we're having this effect where the market hasn't really been going up, but we're getting this influence of the Reserve Bank or the government regulations trying to make it harder for us to borrow money too. So I suppose really what you should look at is what's happening over the long term. Is there anything really negative happening over the long term? A lot of, me personally, I think there's a lot of negative perceptions out there. People are worried they're going to be losing their jobs. So that's why people aren't spending money. But if you look at, our incomes are relatively stable, our the cost of living are relatively stable. There's not really a lot of the reason at the moment. In Adelaide we got the worst unemployment in the mainland states, but saying that, it's not extreme, and so most people do still have a job. And so the question is when people start not being able to keep their jobs and unemployment does start to bump up, but again the government's out there trying to stop that. So I can't really see, we're in a pretty good financial situation at the moment, so I can't see any reason why we'd have a recession coming up anytime soon. But you never know if there's some sort of shock from externally. But a lot of the shocks from externally, like the Brexit and the share market shocks and all that sort of stuff from other countries, they don't have a direct effect on our lifestyle. They probably have an indirect effect on our lifestyle. So again, probably more of a psychological effect rather than a material effect. So I'm a bit of an optimist, so I suppose that's the way I live my life. So I'm not predicting a recession anytime soon, but who knows? Who knows? At the end of the day, I'm not an economist or anything. So hopefully that's been useful for you guys. And I know that Asley reckons that there's same sort of situations happening in Auckland. So hopefully you've got some useful information out of our conversation tonight. And yeah, if you want me to talk about your suburb, I'm happy to do. I'll pick out a couple of people to do a suburb profile, actually talk about your suburb and talk about what the market is doing in your particular suburb. Because remembering that all this information is quite general to the Adelaide property market. So if I focus on one particular suburb, then I can really give you a lot of detail of what's happening. So thanks for your time, guys. I know I went a little bit over and more than usual, but hopefully you got some really good use out of it. If you've liked what I had to say, then click on the like button. If you haven't liked it, still click on the like button because I really appreciate it. And if you think someone else is in the property market and they're just interested to know what's going on, then click on the share button. I'm sure they'll find it useful. And if you've got a comment or something you'd like to say, put it in the comment box and I really appreciate it. So thanks, guys. I appreciate your time and I look forward to talking to you all good soon. Bye. Well, sorry about that.